A girl went home after a party with her friends and suddenly stopped responding to messages. As soon as the police got involved in the case, they encountered an extremely unexpected turn of events, making this investigation truly unique. However, this uniqueness led to the detectives being unable to solve the case even with a large amount of evidence in hand. But in the end, they still managed to achieve justice. Jessica Linklater was born on May 8, 1982 in Austin, Texas. She lived there with her parents and two brothers, and later her entire family moved to a small town called Flagler. Jessica was a very kind and sociable person, which earned her many friends. She was also known for her determination and had decided to become a teacher during her school years. To achieve this, she enrolled at Texas State University, where she earned a Bachelor of Science degree. After that, Jessica decided to continue her studies and pursue a master's degree while working as a teacher's assistant at an elementary school. Additionally, during her studies, she took a part-time job at a supermarket. She had to pay off her student loans and support herself, so Jessica had to work hard. Despite her busy schedule, she maintained a positive attitude and believed that all her efforts would eventually pay off. On September 7th, Jessica had a day off and decided to spend it with her friends and her cousin Melanie. First they relaxed by the pool, then went to a restaurant. Later they visited a bar, played pool, and Jessica drove everyone home. Her cousin was the last drop off, since it was already around 3 a.m. Melanie suggested her to stay the night, but Jessica refused because she had to work a morning shift at the supermarket and buy food for her dogs. A few hours later, closer to morning, one of Jessica's co-workers called Melanie. She said Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift, which was unusual. First, Jessica had never missed work without a valid reason and rarely missed shifts at all. Second, by that time she had become the store manager, which added to her responsibilities. Melanie grew worried and called several friends, but none of them had heard from Jessica that morning. Then she called her brother John. He and Jessica shared an apartment. However, John said he hadn't seen her either. He was a police officer and had left for his shift at 5:30 a.m. John hadn't heard Jessica come home during the night and hadn't checked her room. He immediately returned home, but Jessica wasn't there. It seemed as if she had never returned. Jessica's dogs were acting strangely, as if they hadn't been fed for a long time. This seemed suspicious to him, and John decided to contact his colleagues at the police department, asking them to track her phone's location. The signal led them to her car. Police officers were dispatched to the scene and quickly found Jessica's car in the parking lot. As they approached and opened the door, a horrifying sight greeted them. Jessica was in the driver's seat, showing no signs of life. She had visible burns and the car was unbearably hot. The officers called for backup and an ambulance. The doctors confirmed Jessica was dead and her body was sent for further examination. Meanwhile, investigators began examining the car. The first thing they noticed was that the driver's seat was pushed too far back, given the various injuries on the victim's body. Detectives suspected someone might have attacked her inside the car. They also determined that someone had taken her keys, wallet, and bank cards. A bag of dog food was on the back seat, suggesting Jessica might have been in the parking lot since the night before, as she had planned to stop by the store after dropping off her cousin. After inspecting the car, detectives went to speak with the restaurant employees where Jessica's car was found. They were in for something truly unexpected. One employee said she had arrived at work early in the morning and saw the victim's car in the parking lot. At that time, Jessica was still alive. According to the witness, Jessica was sitting in the car naked and behaving very strangely, as if under the influence of some substance. Despite the outside, the witness did intervene and went to work. Sometime later, she went outside again, and this time Jessica was sitting next to her car. She was dressed but still acting strangely. She was just sitting there touching her hair. The last time the witness went outside, Jessica was back in the car, talking to herself and making strange hand gestures. The police found several other witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning, but none of them called an ambulance or even checked if she was okay. After speaking with witnesses, detectives returned to the Melanie and asked if Jessica could have been under the influence of alcohol or something stronger. However, her sister stated that Jessica had been completely sober that evening because she had to drive everyone home and work the next morning. As for illegal substances, Jessica had never touched them in her life. Additionally, Jessica had numerous bruises and scratches and had been sexually assaulted. According to experts, all of this could have caused brain damage, which was exacerbated by the fact that she spent several hours in a closed car under the scorching sun. This could explain her strange behavior and inability to call for help. Most likely, Jessica was disoriented and unaware of what was happening to her, and the injuries ultimately led to her death. Toxicology reports also confirmed there were no traces of alcohol or other substances in her blood. Thus, if any of the witnesses has called an ambulance, doctors might have been able to save her. Now detectives had to identify her killer. They focused on finding surveillance cameras, but there were none near the parking lot. However, the police realized that if Jessica had bought dog food in the middle of the night, she must have gone to the 24-hour Walmart across the street. After obtaining footage from Walmart, investigators saw Jessica drive into the parking lot and into the store. At that point, there were no signs anything was wrong. She walked past the pet food aisle, picked up a large bag, and went to the checkout. Then she left the store, and detectives noticed something interesting. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her out. Reviewing other footage, they saw the man had arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the other end of the lot and went inside but didn't enter the store. He used the restroom and left. Footage from the entrance showed the man walking straight toward Jessica, clearly in a hurry. However, a problem arose. Jessica's car was parked behind a large tree, completely blocking it from the camera's view. Still, the footage was enough to track the man's movements. He approached Jessica's car, disappeared behind the tree, and never came back. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car left the parking lot, and another camera later captured it arriving at the restaurant parking lot where she would be found the next morning. Sometime later, a person got out of the car, walked back to the Walmart parking lot, and got into the same vehicle he had arrived in. Detectives had almost no doubt this man was directly involved in the murder. However, the poor quality of the surveillance footage made it impossible to identify him. Soon, detectives found more leads. As mentioned earlier, Jessica's bank cards were missing from her car. Investigators checked their activity and discovered one of the cards had been used at a gas station about 20 minutes after Jessica's car arrived at the restaurant parking lot. Gas station footage confirmed the suspect had paid for gas, and the camera near the register showed it was the same man. This strengthened suspicions against him. They released images of the suspect and his car to the media, asking for any information about him, and continued searching for other clues. Then a woman named Leslie called. She said the man in the footage looked like her fiance's best friend, 29-year-old Crispin Harla. And that wasn't all. According to Leslie, Crispin was supposed to visit them that evening to repay a debt but never showed up. Later, she saw the news report about Jessica's murder and couldn't believe he might be involved, but she decided to call the police anyway. Detectives began investigating Crispin and discovered that just a few weeks before the incident, he had been stopped by a patrol officer for driving with an expired license. Reviewing the officer's body cam footage, they confirmed the man resembled their suspect. On the 5th day after Jessica's murder, police went to his home. The first thing they noticed was his pickup truck. It was the same model as in the footage. However, Crispin seemed to have altered its appearance. Some chrome elements had been painted black. As soon as he opened the door, Crispin surprised detectives with his story. He immediately admitted to meeting Jessica that night. According to him, they had met on an adult website and arranged to hook up casually. Crispin claimed they met in the Walmart parking lot, after which he got into Jessica's car and she drove him to a park. Then, according to him, they had sex, after which Jessica drove him back to the Walmart parking lot. They talked for a while and Crispin mentioned his recent financial troubles. Jessica then gave him her bank card to pay for gas, after which they say goodbye and parted ways. The next day, when he saw the news about Jessica's murder, Crispin found it strange and feared he might be accused. Because of this, he threw away her card and painted his truck. Despite his confident tone, detectives realized his story was a complete lie, an attempt to avoid responsibility. The surveillance footage alone was enough to dismantle his account. Crispin claimed they had arranged to meet in the parking lot, yet they didn't approach Jessica until she returned to her car. He also said she drove him back, but the footage clearly showed him walking back to his own car, while Jessica's car remained parked until the next morning with no one else approaching it. Detectives examined Crispin's phone and computer, as well as Jessica's devices, as they suspected there was no evidence they had communicated or arranged a meeting. Jessica had never visited the website Crispin mentioned. However, Crispin's computer did reveal something interesting. Just hours after police discovered Jessica's body, he had browsed numerous news articles about the case. Jessica's friends and relatives anonymously told investigators his story couldn't possibly be true. They said Jessica was not the type of engage in casual hookups and would never meet a stranger in a parking lot in the middle of the night. She had also told her friends she needed to sleep before her morning shift and feed her dogs. Investigators believed Crispin was trying to evade responsibility, but with such strong evidence, he had no chance of coming up with a plausible story. Their theory was that events unfolded exactly as the cameras showed. He might have noticed Jessica at Walmart and decided to assault her. He followed her to her car, got inside, and forced her to comply under threats. Then he could have taken her to a nearby park, assaulted her, and returned to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own car. Before leaving, he strangled her and stole her wallet and bank cards. When police presented their theory, Crispin stopped answering questions and asked for a lawyer. Despite the strong evidence, the police faced a major problem. The fact that the victim had remained alive for several hours jeopardized the case. The issue was that doctors couldn't determine the exact cause of death with absolute certainty. As mentioned earlier, medical examiners concluded the cause of death was strangulation. But there had never been a documented case where strangulation didn't cause immediate death, allowing the victim to walk and talk afterward. The prosecutor doubted a guilty verdict against Crispin was realistic. The only thing that could help hold him accountable was a confession, but Crispin continued to insist on his innocence. Thus, detectives found themselves in a difficult position. They believed Crispin was likely responsible for the murder, and no one else could have physically committed the crime. But because Jessica had remained alive until morning, the case could fall apart. Additional evidence was also lacking. There were no fingerprints or DNA from Crispin in the car. However, the prosecution found a temporary solution. They charged him with evidence tampering in Jessica's case. As mentioned earlier, Crispin admitted to throwing away her bank card, which allowed them to charge him with at least one crime. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Of course, detectives didn't plan to drop the case and intended to achieve full justice, but they needed to find convincing evidence proving his involvement in the murder. This continued until 2013, when detectives came across a scientific article. It described cases where strangulation didn't cause immediate death but instead led to a delayed death syndrome. The facts in the article matched Jessica's behavior after the attack and supported the medical examiner's initial conclusion that she might have suffered brain damage, leaving her disoriented and unable to call for help. Detectives contacted the article's author and began preparing murder charges, supplementing them with the new scientific data. In May 2014, they officially arrested Crispin, but he continued to maintain his innocence. At trial, his lawyer argued that no DNA evidence linked Crispin to the victim. According to the prosecution's theory, Jessica should have stretched him, leaving his DNA under her nails. However, prosecution experts pointed out that Jessica had spent hours in a hot car. Under such extreme heat and humidity, DNA traces could degrade rapidly, possibly disappearing by the time they were examined. Additionally, the prosecution relied heavily on the surveillance footage, which unequivocally pointed to the suspect's guilt. But an unexpected problem arose. Crispin's lawyer argued that the prosecution had added timestamps to the footage. During the investigation, the prosecution had used a special program to add timecodes to the videos. The lawyer claimed this was a serious violation, as he hadn't been provided with the timestamped footage. In the end, the judge sided with the defense and declared the trial invalid. Thus, due to a technicality, Crispin avoided punishment once again. Nevertheless, he continued serving his 10-year sentence, and the prosecution began preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's lawyers tried to prevent a retrial, but eventually a higher court ruled in favor of the prosecution. A new trial began in 2018, and this time the prosecution took every precaution to ensure the defense couldn't exploit any technicalities. In the end, they convinced the jury of his guilt, and Crispin was finally convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, as the prosecution had decided against seeking the death penalty to avoid reducing the chances of a guilty verdict. The prosecution understood that the delayed death syndrome could still raise doubts, and for a death penalty case, the defendant's guilt must be absolutely clear. Years later, Crispin attempted to appeal the verdict, but his appeal was rejected. Thus, he remains behind bars with almost no chance of ever being released. Jessica's family thanked the investigators and prosecutor for seeing the case through, even though it took many years. However, they admitted that while they had hoped the verdict would ease their pain, the criminal's punishment did little to alleviate their suffering.